Hello, everyone. My name is Peter, and you are listening to My Best Life, a podcast where we talk to people about what it means to live their best lives. This morning I was on my yoga mat and doing a bit of yoga, doing a bit of breath work, doing a bit of meditation. And before I started my practice, I had set an intention for the practice, and my intention was to release whatever is not serving me well. So I'm in the midst of my practice, and sometimes when I get deep into a yogic posture, I can feel a bit of release. This morning it was mostly in my left hip, where I felt a bit of tightness there, and was feeling a lot of release. Got pretty intense at times, kind of on the border between pleasure and pain, to be very honest. So anyhow, it kind of struck me because, when you're feeling that kind of tension, sometimes you hear that little nagging voice in your head that is full of doubt and full of uncertainty and is, really motivated by fear of failure, fear of whatever it is. And, sometimes we all hear that voice, and like everyone else, I hear it from time to time. But the thing that I've discovered through my practice is that when you take the time and really listen and be still, that there is another voice that can be heard, which is, some traditions would call it your true self. There are lots of other ways to describe it. Your conscience, your authentic self, the universe, whatever your particular belief system is. Maybe you think God is talking to you. Who knows? In any event, there's that other voice which is full of compassion, self-compassion, first and foremost, because we have to acknowledge that, none of us is perfect. I've certainly made my share of mistakes over the years, that's for sure. But yeah, that voice is forgiving. It says, yeah, you've made some mistakes, but hey, you're trying, right? You're getting back on the bicycle and taking another run at it, getting back up off your feet after having been knocked down, and you are doing your best to live your best life. And in the end, that's all you really need to do. So anyhow, that was my little reflection this morning while I was engaged in my practice, and I thought I would share that as I introduce the second guest on the podcast. Another yogi, surprise, surprise. Not a big surprise, since I've been so immersed in that world in the last 7 or 8 years. Another one of my teachers who I'm very, very happy to present, and I was very delighted to have this conversation with her. Her name is Devinder Kaur. She is a kundalini yogi. She's also the owner of Prana Shanti Yoga Studio in Ottawa, Canada, and just a lovely, lovely human being. Someone that I've already learned quite a bit from, and I haven't known her for that long, maybe a year at most, about that. Yeah, just someone that's very pleasant, very down to earth, very personable, great sense of humor, and a lot of just wonderful, wonderful insights into human nature, into yoga, and related disciplines. So anyhow, we talk a bit about kundalini, whatever that is, and we'll get into that. What else do we talk about? Well, we have such a lovely conversation, and ultimately, I get Devinder's perspective on what it means for her to live her best life. So I think it's a wonderful conversation. Again, just full of wonderful insights from a wonderful human being. So hope you give it a listen, and hope to see you again soon. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Devinder Kaur. Thanks for listening. Devinder Kaur, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I wanted to start with a little quote from a book. It's a book that I think you're familiar with.
Okay.
It's called Kundalini, The Evolutionary Energy in Man by Gopi Krishna.
All right. Yeah.
So here's the quote. And it's talking about Kundalini as this spiritual force that lies dormant in every human being. And once awakened, often through meditation and yoga practices, it apparently rises up through the spine and finds expression in the form of spiritual knowledge, mystical vision, etc., etc. But it can be, for some people, the awakening can be a challenging experience. So here's the quote from Gopi Krishna. Little did I realize that from that day onwards, I was never to be my old normal self again, that I had unwittingly and without preparation or even adequate knowledge of it, roused to activity the most wonderful and stern power in man, that I had stepped unknowingly upon the key to the most guarded secret of the ancients, and that thenceforth for a long time I had to live suspended by a thread, swinging between life on the one hand and death on the other, between sanity and insanity, between light and darkness, between heaven and earth. So when I read something like that, I start wondering to myself, why on earth would I want to awaken this force within me if indeed this force does exist? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's a range of experiences that can be had, right, with all different kinds of energy that exists within us or outside of us. I think Gopi Krishna's explanation there is probably not most people's experience of energy awakening in the body. I think there's ranges and degrees at which that happens, and also ranges and degrees of awareness around what is happening energetically within our bodies or outside of our bodies. So I'm curious, and I spend a lot of time, as you can imagine, practicing, and I love to dabble in all kinds of different yogic practices. So when I hear or read something like that, part of me is like, oh, wow, I would really love that to happen. And then there's another part of me is like, I'm not so sure I would want something like that to happen. I haven't had that type of experience that Gopi Krishna describes. My experience of energy moving in my body is more like a warmth or a sensation of movement in the body, a feeling of calmness or energy, like a more energized feeling. So I can't say that I was moving between life and death or anything like that. Maybe part of his comment is more poetic and metaphoric. I'm not sure. But yeah, why would you then want to practice something like
It
this?
sounds like something, so I had my own experience, which and I to this day, I still don't know whether it was this thing that people call Kundalini.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to share that experience with you because it wasn't quite the same, but
Okay.
it was a really, really powerful energy that I felt. But before we get there, what exactly is kundalini? Because it's this thing that, I think even the average person maybe has heard of, because sometimes you hear about even Hollywood celebrities talking
Yeah.
about raising their kundalini,
Yeah.
and then you kind of roll your eyes and you think, well, is this thing real? Is it just some, passing fad? So in
Yeah.
your experience, like, what is it exactly?
Well, I mean, we know from yogic philosophy and different yogic texts that the idea is that there's a dormant energy at the base of the spine, and through different practices, you can move that energy all the way up through the various chakras, the energy centers, and perhaps even through to the crown of your head and beyond. And different schools have different ideas of what happens to that energy after that, and whether it comes back down within you and circulates or not. So that's, kind of the general philosophy, is that we've got this energy that we can awaken within our bodies. I think everybody's got to have their own experience around that. I teach a lot and I talk to a lot of different people that practice yoga, and again, like, there's just ranges of experience. Some people do feel like they have energy that moves through their body. Some people don't notice anything at all. And that's just fine too. My own experience was that, I do feel like I have a sense of energy moving through my body, through my spine, primarily through to the crown of my head. I feel like there's a warmth. But I think my personal opinion is that when you have this kundalini energy move, it's really there to help us live in our best way, live in our most productive, most awake, alert, inspired way. I don't think it's there to harm you. I think it's there for you. It's part of you if you believe that it exists. And I think really it's just a way of manifesting for ourselves our greatest way of being.
That's actually, if you talk about helping us live our best lives, that's, the theme of the podcast, obviously. And, I alluded to my own experience some years ago. It was about 8 years ago now. And I'll be, very honest, very frank. It was brought on by psychedelics, psilocybin mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first experience. And just to be clear, I had never really tried any drugs as a younger man. It was something that I deliberately stayed away from. But in my early 40s, I got to a point in life where my marriage was falling apart and I was looking for meaning. And all of a sudden, this option was presented to me. It came to me, and I thought, for whatever reason, okay, I have to do this. It seemed like the right path for me. So anyhow, I set up an appointment with this guide that I found through some friends, and I made sure to do it in a country where it was legal because I didn't want to have to worry about that part of things. And so I get to this experience, and maybe, about an hour or two in, and it's hard to keep track of time when you're in that mind space. It's feeling very light. I'm laughing a lot. I'm having some really profound insights, and my guide all of a sudden starts playing some music. Well, he asked me first, "Would you like me to play some music?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And he's got 2 big speakers set up on either side of the couch that I was lying on, and I'm lying on this couch with the blindfold on. My eyes are closed, and it's a really interior experience. And as the music starts playing, he starts playing instrumental reggae music of all things. And, reggae music has that very distinctive offbeat.
Yeah.
And I found that my body started to convulse to the beat of the music. And I just felt this incredibly powerful energy surging through it was concentrated in my spine, but I felt it throughout my whole body. And it lasted for the longest time, and it was the most incredible somatic experience I've ever had.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it lasted. It was at least an hour, perhaps 2. where I felt this energy surging through my body. And from that point, following that experience and a few others that I had, living my best life all of a sudden became very, very important to me. I changed my diet. I started delving into yoga, meditation, related practices. And I had no idea what to make of that experience. Even to this day, I still hesitate to label it as, a kundalini awakening, or I don't know what it was. I just know that it was incredibly powerful. So anyhow, for what it's worth, that was my experience. I don't know if it was kundalini energy, but when I read the descriptions, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does kind of make sense. And I would also even, from the way you described it, is, it comes across too almost like a complete reawakening, a rebirthing of sorts that took place for you. And these the kinds of things can happen, right? Where people, the right circumstance, the right combination of experiences just happen to converge at just the right time when you were looking for something and wanting to have that type of experience as well. And, the combination of energy moving and the music and the psychedelics and the rhythm and the beat and whatever that combination is. And it's probably people can have very similar experiences with different factors, created that moment, like you said afterwards, I wanted to change the way I was living. It was so profound that it really awakened something within you that now I need to make this change and make this change in my life. And it's almost, for want of a better word, like you were fast-tracked into that. Whereas some other people might take years of yoga practice to come to these kinds of next steps in their life that they want to make change, or it appears very gradually for them. But yours was like, whoosh, let's go.
It sure was. It sure was.
Yeah.
So tell me about Kundalini yoga, the practice itself, and what brought you to it.
So the type of Kundalini yoga that I teach and that I practice is known as Kundalini yoga, is taught by Yogi Bhajan. There's many different types of Kundalini yoga, but the basic premise for Kundalini yoga in general is about moving energy through your body, having an awakening of your mind, body, and spirit. And the one that I practice that I enjoy has a lot of rhythmic movement to it. There's chanting. It's considered to be like a holistic practice because it has postures, breathwork, sound, mantra, all combined into one practice or class type of experience. So that's what Kundalini yoga generally is. There's Hatha versions of Kundalini yoga. There's Tibetan versions of Kundalini yoga. There's all kinds of different versions of it and different flavors based on who's the teacher. And I happened across this particular type of Kundalini yoga while actually I was doing a Hatha yoga teacher training. The idea was go and try different styles of yoga. I didn't even know this style of yoga existed. And I went to the class and I thought, I will never do that class ever again. It was too weird.
Is that right?
It was too weird. I didn't like it. I didn't care for it. I couldn't understand, why is the teacher making us do these postures? They don't seem to make any sense. And I went home completely frustrated by the whole experience and thought, I will never do that ever again. And really, it was a friend of mine said, you should go try this Kundalini yoga. I think you might like it. And I called her up and I said, I did not like that. I'm not doing that ever again. That was just way too weird. But a number of months later, I ended up in a Kundalini yoga class. I didn't intend on going to a Kundalini yoga class. I was actually in the wrong room and the wrong studio room. But I went to try to exit the room to roll up my yoga mat, but it was making too much noise and the room was very quiet and people were quite still and preparing, for the start of the class. Instead of making a lot of noise, I just left the mat and attended the class.
So you were in the right room after all.
So perhaps I was in the right room after all. Who knows? And anyways, the teacher came in and I had this wonderful class experience. And so that's what really intrigued me, is that the first time I didn't care for it, yet the second time I had a really great experience. And I felt really quite uplifted for, the rest of that day and into the next day. And I really enjoyed it. So I thought, okay, what's that all about? Like, why did I have those two contrasting experiences? So I went back and tried a few more kundalini classes, finished off the Hatha teacher training, and thought, I got to learn more about this. This is really interesting to me. So yeah, and then I just started going to more kundalini yoga classes, and then eventually got involved in a kundalini teacher training, and then started teaching both styles of classes.
That's a fascinating story.
I did not
and
like
one
the
that
very first one, no. No. Which I now get, like when I see people come to class.
Sure.
And it was a good teaching moment in as much as I can relate to people coming to these classes and thinking that's really strange, or that's really out there, or what is she doing now? Like I get that now because I was in those shoes. Yeah.
Well, certainly if you start with other varieties of yoga, like hatha yoga or ashtanga, you come to a kundalini class and it is very different.
It's very different. Yeah. It's very different. And, the movements are different. I mean, there's some postures that are very much like hatha yoga, and some of them are just like, wow, that's just really out there. But, that's kind of what makes it interesting. I think that's kind of what keeps you engaged in it, because you just don't know what's coming next. It's not that predictable. So you don't have that sense of going sort of into autopilot, because you don't know what's coming next in the lineup of the postures.
So you mentioned that you studied kundalini yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about him? Because I do understand that he's a bit of a controversial figure in the yoga world.
Very controversial.
Yeah, some allegations surfaced a few years back, and can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, very, very sadly. So unfortunately, like many spiritual traditions, the spiritual teacher misbehaved, fell, and that happened in the kundalini yoga tradition as we've been discussing. And, if it was at that time, it was in 2020, very, very upsetting, obviously, and distressing for so many people that enjoyed the practice and really enjoyed the community. And I mean, obviously, it was devastating for myself as well. But, what an example yet again that we see in society of, power dynamics and, things, being mishandled and people becoming hurt, so we see it, in all walks of life, right? We see it in sports, we see it in church and movies and what have you. So unfortunately, yeah, it happened in this tradition as well. So, I still enjoy the practice. I still get a lot of benefit from the practice. I enjoy teaching it. I've seen, for 20 plus years, people have great experiences with the practice. So I choose to continue practicing it. I mean, I didn't take on Kundalini Yoga because of a spiritual teacher. I took on Kundalini Yoga because I enjoyed the practice and how it made me feel and the community aspect of it. So to me, it wasn't about a single teacher concept. I have a mindset, personal mindset, that I like to study and learn from as many different people as possible, because I don't really believe one person holds all the information. So anyway, I still have a strong interest in many different yoga styles. But for me, the practice of Kundalini Yoga, and particularly the meditations that are part of Kundalini Yoga and the breath work, really have supported me and helped me over these past 20 plus years. So although it was and is still distressing that, these allegations and problems came to light, I still feel that there's great value in the practice.
Has it changed your relationship to the practice in any way?
Yeah, it has. I used to be very interested in, I guess you could call it, sort of the ritual side of the practice. The Sikh faith is still something I relate to, but I definitely changed how I teach when that information came forward. And I guess I've kind of always been sort of a skeptic, in that I like to really try something first to see if it works for me or not. And there's some practices in Kundalini yoga that are just not interesting to me, but there's some that are really fantastic, and I think they're great. So the ones that I feel that support me and have helped me, that's the stuff I teach. The other stuff I don't bother, I just don't bother with. So I've kind of always been a little discerning about that. So I still continue to do that. And, and I, for want of a better word, try to reverse engineer the kriyas and the meditations, and like, well, where did this come from? Where did that come from? Who created this? Who created that? Because Yogi Bhajan was like many of the teachers that came to the West in the 70s. He came with his own brand and style of practice. And where did he get that from? And who did he get that from? And where does that exist? And where did that mantra come from? And so I want to understand all of that and bring that forward into how I teach and what I teach, so that I feel like I'm speaking from a place in class, at least, that is honoring wherever the tradition, originated from. None of these teachers really created anything brand new.
Sure.
A lot of them repackaged, right? And what we see with Kundalini yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan is, a compilation of different things. Like the chakra system is represented in Kundalini yoga. Yogi Bhajan did not create the chakra system, and there's a lot of Ayurveda in Kundalini yoga. That was not something created by the teacher. So, I like to look back and see where all of those things actually came from and what the origins of those things are.
You mentioned mantra, and I wanted to touch upon that subject in particular, because when I started my first Kundalini classes, it was one of the things that I noticed, coming from a Hatha yoga background, where there is certainly mantra in Hatha yoga, but in your typical yoga studio in the West, you don't really hear it too much, I don't think. Whereas in a Kundalini class, it's used
a lot of mantra
extensively. So can you talk about mantra and why it's used and the relevance of sound and sound energy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mantra in Kundalini yoga, and probably more than what you would have in most modern day Hatha classes or other styles, which is not to say that they don't exist, because Hatha yoga is super rich in mantra, but it just seems to be a little less included. But there is a fair amount of mantra in Kundalini yoga. Some of it comes from, Sri Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh holy book. Some of it is created in modern times by perhaps Yogi Bhajan or other teachers. And it's there, to have this experience of internal vibration, raise our internal vibration through our own vibration, through our own voice. And it's a really effective tool. And so if we can create and change our mood, for example, through changing our vibration, through changing our internal frequency, a way to do that is with sound and mantra. And, in Kundalini yoga, sound comes not just from mantra, but it also comes from the gong as an instrument being played in the class. So it's all tied into this idea of, we came from one vibration, we're moving through life with a vibration. We can change our vibration, we can change our perspective, we can uplift ourselves, we can have that vibration as a way to carry ourselves, through difficulties, through challenges, or to just simply, come to a state of peace or calm or, openness in our own mind and our own heart.
Another one of the really interesting practices that I've noticed in Kundalini Yoga is the extensive use of the breath of fire.
Oh, yeah, breath of fire. Yeah, breath of fire.
Can you talk a bit about that and why it's so central to this practice? At least it seems to be to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of breath of fire.
There sure
and
is.
It almost shows up pretty much in every Kriya. I actually really love breath of fire. I think it's, this rapid breath to, again, move the navel center, move the energy, play with the energy of the third chakra to create some change for ourselves. And, it's a cleansing breath. It's a revitalizing breath. So there's a bunch of purposes for it. And it's interesting too, because I was teaching a breathwork course not too long ago and looking at breathwork in Hatha yoga. And I actually, had for the longest time had thought that breath of fire was very similar to Kapalabhati. We say that a lot in class, and we say that in trainings, oh, it's very much like Kapalabhati. It's just that it's even breath in, even breath out. But I think it's actually closer to Bhastrika than it is to Kapalabhati, because it has a lot of the same elements that Bhastrika has for the powerful breath and the forcefulness or strength of the breath. And the cleansing aspect that Bhastrika also has too. So it's kind of like halfway between Bhastrika and Kapalabhati, which I think is kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way previously. So, it's interesting. It's, it heats you up, it warms you up, it creates the tapas that we want, just as it does with the Hatha practice with Bhastrika and Kapalabhati. It's there for that same kind of purpose. But yeah, we do a fair amount of it, yeah.
And so just for the benefit of listeners who may not be familiar with some of these terms, these practices, so breath of fire is, well, I would describe it as an active exhalation while kind of contracting the abdomen.
Yeah, so you're moving the abdomen, you're moving the belly a little bit in and out with the breath. So with the inhale, you soften, and with the exhale, you draw the navel in. And this is all in effort to move the diaphragm so you can breathe, so that you're making the breath as efficient as possible. So equal breath in, equal breath out, whereas Kapalabhati is more focused on the exhale.
Right.
And then Bhastrika is the powerful, sometimes with arms, powerful breath in, powerful breath out. So that's why I say breath of fire kind of lies sort of almost, it's like a bit of a hybrid of the two. Yeah.
So breath of fire, all these different practices, mantras, what are the benefits? Like, how does this carry over into our daily lives? Why should we be doing?
Why should we do this?
Why should we do this?
Why should we do this practice? Yeah. Well, I don't know. Like I've tried a lot of different yoga and a lot of different practices over the years. And the one thing that stands out for me, particularly with this practice of Kundalini yoga, is the ability for it to move energy in the body. And, if you're in a bad mood or you've had a rough day or you do this kind of practice and it just sort of, you can shift your mood, you can shift your energy very quickly. And it's in, due to the combination of the different things that are happening in a practice, the breath and the mantra, it's got this whole package of different things happening. So I think that contributes to the fact that you can shift your energy, shift your mood quite efficiently. Some of the other benefits, it's fantastic for the nervous system. It's fantastic for your glandular system. These rhythmic movements, moving the lymph, and that just really help you maintain your body, help you live well. And it's not to say that other styles don't do any of that. They certainly do, but I think those probably are the three hallmarks of what it can do for you, like really move the energy and support the nervous system and the glandular system.
This is a quote I found. It's a well-known one from the Bhagavad Gita. Yoga is the journey of the self through the self to the self.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
How does that resonate with you?
I love that
What
quote.
sense do you make of that?
Yeah, I love that quote because
what does it mean?
Yeah, to me it means, it's through yoga that we can really understand ourselves. It's through the practice that we can really learn to understand ourselves. And the tricky thing about being a human being is that we're changing all the time. Every day we're having different experiences, different things are happening for us. But the one thing that can stay steady is your practice. And then through your practice, you're having this journey of the self through the self. Because, we're here having our life and we're living our life. And, with a steady practice. And typically, that's meaning like a daily practice that, this is where you're going to be able to come into that sense of yourself and really have an experience of yourself over time. I mean, if we don't spend the time every day to kind of check in with ourselves and see how we're doing, how do we know where we're going or where we've been? Living your life sort of on autopilot, going day to day, or being consumed by all that is happening outside of us without looking inside, we miss the journey. We miss the journey of the self to the self.
So you mentioned a daily practice.
Yeah.
Do you have a daily practice?
I do have a daily practice.
What does it look like?
My daily practice is a little bit different every day.
Okay.
But my daily practice is 30 minutes or more, if I can, but it's never really less than 30 minutes. And I will do something a little bit different every day. I try to practice on most of the days of the week the things I'm going to be teaching that week. So it gives me an opportunity to embody and experience what I'm going to be teaching, which I think is important. And then I could be doing, like this morning, I did 30 minutes of chanting. Yesterday, it was 30 minutes of postures. If I'm not feeling well, I might just be lying there on the floor listening to mantra music or listening to a fantastic podcast such as this, But I try to pick things that are supportive to what I need at the time, that are uplifting. It's not kundalini every day. I do different things. I might, do a few yin postures, but I'm doing something every day.
Okay.
That supports me in what I feel that I need to do in the day, that prepares me for my day. My practice is always in the morning. So I get up, get changed, go to the bathroom, whatever. But this is like before tea, before eating, and this is when my practice takes place. It's before the day gets going.
And so, I mean, you certainly come off as a very grounded, balanced person.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you.
I'm sure, like everyone else, you have,
moments.
You have your moments,
yes.
So what do you do on those days when you feel less than motivated to get on your yoga mat?
I do a harder practice.
You do a harder practice?
I do a harder practice.
Wow. Yeah. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
That's not to say like I figured that out right out of the gate. No, I realized that like if I've got something like super challenging going on, or I have to do something difficult or something, that's going to be quite demanding that day, that morning I do a stronger practice. Harder meditation, arms up, because that's something that Kundalini yoga is known for, is a lot of arm work.
Right.
But that's what I'll do, like a strong mantra, or, it won't be all, relaxation and just rolling around. It's going to be something really, really fortifying, to really help, meet the challenge of the day. Do something that your practice has that same energy and vibration that you need to bring to the day.
That's very inspiring.
It's and it took me a while to figure that out, that if I want to carry myself well through the day, like, if you have to do a challenging meeting or something like that, if I got to meet that intensity with my practice.
So you run a yoga studio, a very successful one. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the transition from being a student to being a teacher, and not just doing your own practice, but trying to impart whatever wisdom and knowledge you have and what you've learned to others.
Yeah. Well, I didn't start practicing yoga with the idea to teach. I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to teach anything. I just wanted to go and learn and practice. And so I was a very reluctant teacher. It took a while actually for me to do that. But then once I started teaching, I was like, wow, this is super amazing, because I was learning so much more by teaching than just staying in my own personal practice or just going to class. So I think teaching is a way to actually really learn a lot more. So my travel from student to teacher was not like sort of my own making in a way. I was asked to, come and cover a class. And I said, well, no, I don't do that. I just go to classes. But then
someone trusted you enough.
Somebody thought it would be a good idea. So I said, oh, okay. I came and I taught the class, and it was fine in the end, but it took that prod. It wasn't me seeking it out necessarily. So, and then I taught, classes all over the place for many, many years, and carrying stuff all over the place as you do, when you're learning and you're getting out there and teaching. But I was working full time at the same time as doing that, 2 or 3 classes a week. So as pretty much what I was doing in different places, studios and community centers and gyms and church basements and wherever. And then I sort of got the idea that it was getting a bit much to carry all this stuff around everywhere. You've got a couple of big hockey bags full of bolsters and blankets and pillows and cushions and tea and cups and music players and candles. And, you got all this stuff that you're schlepping around everywhere. And I thought, I think the best thing is to get a little space,
right.
Small space. And that's what I set out to do. And then I realized, well, a small space financially is a bit restrictive.
Right.
So ended up with a bigger space and then a bigger space. So it grew sort of very organically, actually, because my whole plan has never been to have a yoga studio or to teach anything. It was never on my horizon as, one day I'd love to.
Right.
That never, ever came out of my mouth, so it just really kind of took on a life of its own.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because what strikes me is that, as you said initially, you went into this kundalini class, you didn't like it.
Oh, no, that part, yeah. I didn't like that part. Yeah.
You didn't like it, and yet you came back and you ended up falling in love with it. You didn't want to teach, but opportunity presented itself. Yeah. So you just kind of flowed with.
Yeah, I did. I just kind of flowed with what was going on, and I didn't really put a lot of concern into it or worry about it. I just thought, let's see how things evolve. Let's see how things happen, and we'll just roll with it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating though, because, we're taught to plan ahead and, conceptualize how we want our life to go and make plans and set objectives. And yet here you just kind of follow the natural course of things, and
yeah,
you seem very happy.
Yeah,
with where you wound up.
I'm very happy with how things have turned out, and thankfully, things did work out. Growing up, I didn't practice yoga. I didn't come into yoga until I was an adult. I mean, I'd done a few classes here and there, but really not much to speak of. And, it was just an evolution, really, a very slow evolution that, the more I learned, the more I enjoyed, the more I integrated into my life, and yeah, and yoga now is really 100% part of my lifestyle. It's how I live. owning a yoga studio is not for the faint of heart. It's a difficult type of business to operate if you're trying to also embody some yogic values as well.
Sure.
So that makes it a challenge. I have a business background, so that helps. From my past careers that I've had, so that certainly supports it. It's kind of funny, you realize as wherever you land that some of the steps along the way were actually very helpful.
Right.
For
sure.
where you end up.
Well, that's exactly where I wanted to go next. I was going to ask you about the business of yoga, because there seems to be a bit of a tension between yoga as this spiritual practice,
For sure. Yeah.
versus,
The financial component.
A business, which is, a profit making enterprise, and comes with all sorts of different challenges. So can you talk a bit about that tension?
Yeah, there is a tension there. And, what do you do? Here we are in the society that we're in the structure that we're in. And folks want to learn about yoga, want to have an experience with yoga. People want to teach yoga, historically, is this how it was done? No, this is not how it was done. But, here we are in our society that we have today. And this is the model that works in the society that we're in at the moment. So, it's an interesting type of business to be in that, like I was saying, what I try to do anyways is bring as much yogic values forward into it as possible. Can we operate from a place of ahimsa, from a place of compassion? Can we operate from a place of satya, from truth? Can we do that? Which many businesses perhaps don't think about that kind of stuff. And that creates challenges, if, there's a conflict in the workplace,
Right.
How are we going to handle that? Can we handle that in a more compassionate way, or in a way that provides a better outcome for both parties? So there's that going on, as well as, here we are, yoga, people are paying for classes, they're paying for trainings, but we also have to pay for rent and for
Sure.
utilities and to be able to house a space for people to have those kinds of experiences. So it's an interesting dilemma. Yeah.
You mentioned ahimsa. That was another thing that I had jotted down in my notes here. Ahimsa being the Sanskrit term for nonviolence, one of the 10 yogic principles, which are referred to as the yamas and niyamas.
Mhm.
I guess
That's
they're
right. Yeah.
referred to as disciplines and restraints.
Yeah.
Kind of similar, to, the 10 Commandments from the Bible. A little bit different, but
Yeah. It's in that same vein. Yeah.
right. And ahimsa, interestingly, was the principle that inspired Gandhi in his quest to free India from British colonial rule. I know it was something that deeply inspired him, and in turn, Martin Luther King Jr. was then inspired by Gandhi, and with his focus on nonviolence through the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1960s. So, in a way, you can say that yoga has inspired peaceful revolutions in two countries, and two of the most successful revolutions, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Probably because they adhered to the yogic principle of nonviolence.
Yeah. How can we make the world a more compassionate place, a more fair and just place? Yeah. Which is so relevant as it is today and as always, right? So yeah, these values, like you said, they pop up across many different wisdom traditions and faiths, and for good reason, right? This is, we're always trying to improve ourselves and live in a way that can just bring a little bit more peace and kindness to everybody. And I think, and there's a role for yoga studios and, to be a place of peace for people, place of refuge for people to escape whatever challenges they might have going on in their lives. So, that's an important aspect of teaching. It's something I try to bring, into pranashanti from a business perspective. So there's another example of like, how do we apply some yogic value, to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that can be really inspiring for people in their personal lives.
For sure.
Yeah.
One more quote I wanted to share. This is from I think he's a yoga teacher by the name of Jigar Gaur. Yoga is not about touching your toes. It's about what you learn on the way down.
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? Yeah, I like that.
What have you learned on the way down or on the way up?
What have I learned on the way down to touching my toes? Yeah, so much, Yeah, just so much. Like, I think one of the things that I think about, like with yoga, is it's a very vast topic, right? It's so vast, Forget about all the different styles. The main premise is, to have an experience of yourself and really get to know yourself, not the hats you need to wear for different parts of your life or the roles you play in different aspects of your life or different years or times, but like, who are you really? And I think that's one of the things that I've learned a lot more is about myself and, what I like, what I don't like, what I want to do and how I want to spend my time and what is of value to me. And it really ends up being, it's the simple things are what is of value, time shared with good friends, a shared laugh, partway through the day, all these kinds of little things is really what in the end is valuable. And, striving and trying to obtain and do and be is something that, I really let go of after a certain point in time. And, I guess that's one of the things you learn on the way down to touching your toes is that success can look very different than what you think it is. Yeah.
Wonderfully said. One last question for you.
Okay.
The premise of this podcast is we're looking at how to live your best life. So what does that mean to you? How does one live their best life?
Well, I think living your best life is probably something that takes your lifetime to figure out. And blessed are those that figure it out sooner, that, I think we all land in this particular lifetime that each of us are in with a certain set of challenges and hopefully come through with an experience that feels like a life well lived. And, I think every day it's about, getting up every morning and looking forward and knowing that, today's going to be a great day because I've opened my eyes and I'm here still and I'm going to have another run at it. And we're not always going to be perfect. And we're always going to be making mistakes. That's part of life. But we can learn from it and we just get better and better at doing and being in life, which ultimately, hopefully, will lead us to living our best life because we're just going to get better and better at it every day. I don't think it's about, the money or the things or the toys or the chasing or the material aspects. That's all fantastic and that's great and it fulfills to a certain point. But in the end, what really fulfills you is what actually makes you happy and what gives you the greatest joy. And if we can find that, then that's really living your best life. If you can find those things that give you the greatest joy, which are usually the things that, that kind of light you up from the inside and are not short-lived. So, and that takes time, and it takes maturity, and it takes letting go, and it takes a sense of openness and trust that it's going to work out.
What a wonderful way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Devinder.
My pleasure. These are awesome questions and great discussion.
You've had awesome responses and awesome insights. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. You're an inspiration. And this has been a truly wonderful experience for me. So thank you so much, Devinder.
Thank you, Peter.
Very much appreciated.
I'm so appreciative as well, and I look forward to hearing all the other amazing episodes you're going to have as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.